Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Business Builders. Today I'm joined with Jake Albion from Albion Digital Web Studio, a Fort Myers-based web design business that builds and maintains WordPress websites. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Our topic today is an interesting one as it's something that everyone who either owns a website or runs a website or does any type of marketing needs to be concerned about, and that is accessibility. But before we dive into exactly what that is and why it's important and you know how you need to protect yourself, Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
All right, so I've been in marketing for I think about 7 years now. I've been a web developer for about 4. I just in the last couple of years I've gone off to do business on my own, building WordPress websites. I work with both large agencies and small businesses to help build and maintain their websites.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today. I guess we should kind of open it up with the easiest question of really, what is accessibility and why does it play an important role in today's digital marketing world?
Yeah, so to start off, I do feel the need to say I am not a lawyer. So everything I say today is more from opinion and experience. I am someone that does study accessibility very closely and takes it seriously, especially because I am a colorblind designer. So I am affected by it. But so these are just more of my opinions on it. When it comes to accessibility, what you're talking about is both the design and functionality of a website and how people with disability, how it affects people with disability. So if you're blind, it's about screen readers. Like, how does a screen reader interact with your website, which is a completely different experience than someone who can see. And for someone who can see, maybe they're a low vision user, right? Like, maybe grandma has, what is it called, cataracts, like maybe there's like holes on the screen for her. So it's our job as web developers and as agencies to make sure that we're creating the best experience for those people. And it actually will directly complement the experience we're creating for any normal user as well. So the whole point of doing it is to create a great experience on a lot of different levels.
And you mentioned it earlier before we started recording that we're not just talking about websites, right? We're kind of talking about the whole digital marketing experience here, correct?
Yeah. There's accessibility when it comes to branding that really affects designers more on like how to use colors when you're using branding. Is there enough contrast? I always joke about the fact that like you don't want to use colors for your brand that like an ad shows up and you're using like red and green, and I'm red-green colorblind. So I'm probably just going to straight up ignore your ad. That's not good for anybody. Like, right. I want to see what product you're selling, because if I'm seeing an ad, it should mean that it's relevant to whatever I'm looking for. So that's the way I like to think about it is, we want to be pushing out positive marketing, not what I call marketing pollution, right? Like when you get an ad that has nothing to do with you, that I don't, obviously we all have been trained to look over that. But when you get an ad that is relevant to you, you want to make sure you position it as well as possible with the colors and kind of the way it's set up to make sure that, people are going to see what you want them to see.
Yeah, and we'll get into a little bit more of the details of those specifics a little bit later. Mm-hmm. So don't worry about that. I guess from the business standpoint, mm-hmm. talk to me about, why it should resonate for people in small businesses, or why it's important for businesses to really care about accessibility.
So the reason I really care about it is, as I mentioned before, it's not just about people with disabilities. You're also using these practices to create a better experience even for people that don't have disabilities. So the way I like to think about it is I'm not just building a better experience for anyone that comes to the website, but on top of that, even if someone who's blind comes to the website, it's not going to be the same experience, but they're getting the same information and understanding the same way. And what you're doing is you're actually increasing the number of people that can actually buy your product or contact you for your service. And that's really why businesses should care, is if you don't look at this stuff or you just assume that it works out of the box, because a lot of website software comes accessible out of the box, but when someone touches it,
it messes it up.
Exactly. Yeah. So making sure that like the best practices are kind of followed through means that you're actually increasing the number of customers that you're reaching, or potential customers that you're reaching. You're not just doing it because I'm going to try to stay away from lawsuits in this conversation, but the motivation to do it so you don't get sued you're not going to likely do the right practices to actually get the value out of it. And the value out of it is creating the greatest experience for the most number of people as possible. So when they come to your website, they know whether or not they want to work with you.
Perfect. No, I mean, it makes total sense, right? Why limit your audience pool as much as you can here?
Yeah.
So is there a general guideline or list of rules that has a name to it that people can kind of look up to make sure they're on the right path?
Yeah, I believe it's an international organization called WCAG. There's different levels too. So there's three different levels. There's single A compliance, which is a much older version of compliance from like 2010. Then there's WCAG 2, which is the more recent one. I think came out like 2018. I think we're on like 2.2 right now. So they do start adding more things. It's kind of like a massive checklist where you kind of go through and you check the many different layers to a website. Like you're looking at the content, you're looking at the functionality, you're looking at like everything on every level. And then there's AAA compliance. So the thing to understand with this stuff, if you are talking to someone about compliance levels, if like, because it can get expensive trying to adjust it if you have a website that you're trying to make compliant.
Right.
A good place to start is talking to someone about getting single A done. So you can reach single A compliant. You can have stuff on your website that says, hey, this is an ongoing effort to improve it. And then when you get to double A, that's more of the average compliance level that most businesses are looking for. And then AAA compliance is extreme. Like you can tell a AAA compliance website because it's like, for those of anyone that remembers, it's just an HTML website basically.
So it's sort of like a plain with maybe just some headers, maybe one or two images, and
oh yeah, it's super. I would say bare. I was gonna say ugly. That's a terrible word. Oh, it's just very bare because it's really AAA compliance is now you've gone overboard. So now you're catering. This isn't the best way to say it, but the way I think about it is you're catering more to people with disabilities than you are to everyone. So AA compliance is that harmony between the two. Where
kind of like the perfect balance.
Exactly. Yeah. So single A is like a step in the right direction. AAA is like, okay, we overdid it. AA is like that sweet spot.
So people should be looking for, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it's WCAG AA.
Yeah, and I'll make sure that if you want to include the link too.
Yeah, I'll definitely, anything that we're talking about here today, I'll definitely make sure we've got the links for that. Okay, so moving on a little bit, what can happen to businesses if their website isn't ADA compliant?
It first of all depends on what level. I fortunately haven't really run into too many businesses that run into this issue. I've had people come to me that said that they've had issues and they put on what we call an overlay widget. Those are those little accessibility buttons. So they'll just add that as like a quick fix. But I would say if someone is reaching out to you, it's because there is a disabled person that tried to use your site and it wasn't working. So the first thing that you really want to do is actually, if you haven't done so already, put something on your site so people can reach out to you about stuff like this, because that's really the first step you want to take. When I first learned about accessibility, you used to get a warning, and then you would have to like basically show whoever it was like, hey, we're taking the right steps to do it. They don't do that anymore. So what you can do first off is put something on your site that someone can contact you about those inaccessible things, because if you just get a letter from a lawyer, let's say, and they don't give you any information, well, now you're just going to try to sit there and do all this compliance stuff, and it's kind of crazy. Whereas if you get feedback, you can kind of address those situations as they come in. And you're also creating an environment for someone to reach out to you first before they decide that they're going to go out to a lawyer.
So should this contact form or button be any different from like your general contact us part on your website? Or are we talking more along the lines of like, you know, on the bottom of websites that kind of have like the accessibility or the terms or the privacy and things like that? It should be more along those lines.
Yeah, it should be, we call it an accessibility statement. So it's like privacy policy, and you should have a privacy policy as well. That's another very big thing that comes up a lot with accessibility. But yeah, so make sure you have those. I'm not going to say they're legal because they're not, but they are ways to inform users how your site's being used. That's the big thing nowadays because privacy is such a big deal. Like accessibility is the same thing as privacy. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing to improve this site to make sure that like you are trying to keep this as open to everyone as possible? Because that's what my understanding, based on a lot of talks and stuff I've gone to, is if you do have to end up in a position with a lawyer or talking to a judge, they want to see that you're actually making improvements.
Making the effort, yeah.
Yeah, that's why an accessibility statement can say things like, oh, we're looking for single A, or we're currently at single A compliance, working toward AA compliance.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Are there any tools out there for business owners or people who manage websites that they can use to kind of help them scan their website or get an audit on their website, or let them know maybe they're at single A and they need to get to AA, that sort of thing?
Yeah, some of the stuff does get comprehensive, but there are tools out there. The first thing I would suggest, and this is more toward the accessibility statement, is go to the WCAG website, or actually you can just Google it and just put in accessibility statement generator. And that'll walk you through some of the basics of like how you can start testing your site, because it's part of creating an accessibility statement. Now that's different than, say, if you were using Userway or an Accessibee, where they just populate a statement on there for you. And these guys have generators and stuff too, but The reason why you have to be careful about these checkers is they don't account for human interaction. And what that means is it'll search your site and say, oh yeah, all these images have alt tags, but the alt tag might just be one word that has nothing to do or create any value for the user. So even though you may quote unquote be avoiding trouble, you're not really creating a good experience for people. So you're throwing money out the window when you do stuff like that. You're not really fixing the problem. Like if you have like those little tiny little thumb band-aids, like that's literally what you're doing to it.
I got you.
You're not fixing it at all.
Well, you mentioned it in what you last discussed about kind of having the alt tags. I guess now would be a good time to kind of walk through people what might be a basic checklist to kind of help with accessibility. So obviously what you're talking about is, if you have an image on your website, how does someone, or even how does Google, we can get a little bit more technical, how does someone who can't see the image go through your website and know what's actually on your website page? So obviously that would be an alt tag.
Yeah, it's actually bigger than that because the thing about alt tags or alt text is also part of SEO. So if you're using, say, Yoast on a WordPress website, they'll say like, oh, there's no keywords in your alt text. And what they're saying is, number one, the image might not be relevant to the page, which, is a downside for SEO. So they're actually giving you more opportunity. Google is giving you more opportunities to help with your SEO. But on the other hand, too, those descriptions will... Sorry, I feel like I'm going a little off on this.
No, that's okay.
Yeah. So I'm getting kind of deep on this. But anyway, so like to give you an idea, the way to think about alt text is this. It's like 140 character or 200, I'd say 140 character tweet. Like if you're describing that image and it has to do with the content, you're using alt text, right? But if you're just using a decorative image, like maybe you're just creating a really pretty separator, all you have to do is just put a space. And both Google bots, which work pretty similar to the assistive technology, will just ignore it. So now you're also not, like if I'm going through with a, what do you call it? Blanking on it right now. The thing blind people use when they're using the site. I just said the word like half an hour ago.
You're talking about like some type of assistance?
Yeah. Screen reader, there we go.
Okay.
I was blanking on that. But yeah, if you're using a screen reader, because the one thing I would definitely do if you have a Mac, for example, is turn on the accessibility mode. And take the 20 minutes it takes to like walk through it and then try to navigate it through on your site. Like close your eyes. That's exactly what I do with my sites. So that's like literally the first thing I learned how to do before I even started looking at all these different checkers. Some other tools just to keep in mind is if you know what Lighthouse is, which is whenever you use developer tools. This is going to kind of deep for business owners. I'm sure there's an accessibility checker on Google somewhere. I will find it for you guys and make it easier for you. But I use it when I use Google PageSpeed Insights. I check the accessibility levels. But that's usually going to be pretty high, even though, so because it's just an automated checker, it's only checking certain things to say, like I said, like, is there alt text here? Does your header hierarchy descend properly? So for example, a lot of developers make the mistake of going H3, H1, H4 because of the size of the header. That's a design flaw. What you actually need to do is have it H1, H2, H3. And that's part of what we call technical SEO. So that's where accessibility and SEO tend to start
kind of
to
merge
overlap.
together. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I guess a lot of the items for the checklist would also benefit SEO necessarily as well. So if you haven't done it for SEO, then you definitely need to do it for accessibility because now you're kind of killing two birds with one stone here, right? Yep. So, I mean, that's a great to point out as well. So if you're still not on the fence, like maybe this doesn't really affect me, well, now it 100% does because like you said, it's going to benefit your SEO as well. So we've talked things about, your headers and the design and pictures and the images, accessibility mode if you have a Mac. Is there any other things people can do to kind of build into that checklist to double check on things?
Yeah, a simple tool on your keyboard is called just tabbing through, and you're looking for things called a tab trap. A tab trap is when you tab through, it should skip to link to link to link all the way down. So it should highlight buttons, it should highlight links. A tab trap would be, say, if something like you have a pop-up, right? If you can't exit out of that pop-up, that's a tab trap. That's the kind of stuff that will frustrate users to the point that they may go talk to someone about your website.
Right. And in that sense, it's not even an accessibility thing. It comes down to a user experience issue at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Great.
I do have some content stuff actually, I just remembered too.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
This is, so actually if I was to run off the top of my head right now, just to make it a little bit easier for business owners trying to sit through all the technical stuff. So making sure there's alt text, which is super easy to do. If you're using a WordPress site, just go into media, you can check that. The header hierarchy, like we said. The other thing you have to think about is content itself. So if you have music that auto plays, And it's not really easy to stop, not just for a normal user. If I cannot tab through and figure out how to turn off the music, which actually you shouldn't even autoplay music or videos, now that I think about it.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of stuff too. And does your video have closed captions or captions period? Because you can have what's called open captions. So closed captions are like the things that populate on YouTube, but open captions are when your website has it already. So the issue there is that like if your video already has captions like embedded in the video itself, that doesn't count as closed captions. The screen readers can't read that. So you have to think about things like that. And another really, really big one, because we were talking about animations before, an animation shouldn't run longer than 3 to 5 seconds before stopping. So looping in animation, having something constantly move is another one, especially with flashes, because flashes can cause seizures with people with epilepsy,
right?
Things like that. So the experience you're creating isn't just about preventing, or making it easier for disabled people to use it. I mean, if you know anyone with epilepsy, if you have a lot of big flashing lights, which has happened on websites before, it could create a very bad effect.
Yeah, definitely.
So.
Awesome. So, I guess really the big thing is accessibility seems, now that we're talking about, to tie into a lot of other aspects, whether it's like you said, videos. We talked a little bit about the SEO aspect of it. So really the takeaway from my sense is it's kind of comprehensive of everything. Mm-hmm. So as long as you're double checking these things, you're also doing a lot of other things that are going to benefit your business as well.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Awesome. One of the things that you did mention that I want to touch on, because I think a lot of people kind of use this as the easy way out, are those overlay widgets. I know you briefly mentioned it. We talked a little bit about it before. Why don't you kind of talk a little bit about what they are for people who might be unfamiliar about them first, and then we'll talk about your opinions on them as well.
Okay. I think the overlay widgets are good for people that aren't disabled, to be honest. Like if you want to make the text bigger, things like that, especially if you don't know how to manipulate a site without something like that. But their purpose most of the time is to help people who are disabled using what we call assistive technology, like a screen reader. So the issue with that is that the overlays actually prevent the screen reader from actually, it basically prevents it from having a good experience. So some of the videos I've seen, I haven't tested them as frequently myself, is, can I shout out? Okay, not shout out, but can I talk about one of the overlay? Okay, so if you're using like Accessibility or UserWay, and you were to try to use it with assistive technology, it would interrupt the experience. So as someone's trying to skim through your information, actually, that's a really good place to start with the overlay widgets, is how someone who, say, is blind, experiences a website. So the way they do it is they basically that's where the tabbing comes in. They're skipping down, and they can either read the text content or they can skip different sections. And they're listening to the content. So when you're listening to the content, they listen to it at a rate that can be up to 10 times faster than what we hear. So imagine that you're trying to skip through and find information as quickly as possible, just like a normal person skimming a page. But imagine you're skipping through as fast as possible, but then you're constantly being interrupted by an overlay widget being like, to open, please hit tab. It'd be like a pop-up constantly popping up as you're trying to scroll down a page.
Right. So really the people who actually need it, it's actually hurting them.
Exactly. Yeah. It's making their experience much worse, to the point that they will most likely immediately leave your site. And that's not to say that it doesn't work in some cases, but it's definitely any kind of one-step fix, any kind of automated AI thing doesn't really work for accessibility. It will only fix about 15 to 20% of the accessibility issues.
So I guess the takeaway for an overlay widget is, if you're looking for a quick, simple fix for a certain problem, it's just one of the small little pieces in a whole process to fix that.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's not going to solve enough of a problem like I said, whether you're looking at it, whether you're doing it for a good experience or you're doing it because someone's reached out to you and having an issue, it most likely won't solve the issue that people are concerned with. So the better thing to do is to go through the checklist we discussed and
actually fix the problems.
Yeah. And people get it too, right? So the fact that you're adding alt text, the fact that you're checking the tabbing to make sure people have a good experience there, and the fact that you have an accessibility statement that does need to be updated. But the fact that you have an accessibility statement, that's enough usually to help someone disabled at least understand where your website is at. There are accessibility statements that say, we work well with, I'm trying to remember what the Mac is called, whatever it is. Let's say you work with a very specific time. JAWS is a very popular screen reader, actually. So you can say, this site has been tested and is compatible with JAWS on the accessibility statement. and someone who has JAWS will feel comfortable navigating through your site. Or if JAWS is generally the standard, which in a lot of cases it is, it means that other screen readers most likely work well with it too. Whereas if you work with maybe a lesser known screen reader, at least if it's tested, someone knows it interacts well with that. Because you're not only talking about what it interacts well with, you also kind of bring up like, hey, just so you know, it doesn't work here in this section. But at least they're aware of what's going on. So what that prevents is them ending up in something like a tab trap where they can't get out of it. So you're basically giving them a map to navigate the site, even though the site might not be fully navigatable from a accessibility standpoint.
How often should you update your accessibility statement? Are we talking yearly, or should we do it more frequently than that?
I will tell you the same thing I tell people about social media posts. Update it as frequently and consistently as you're actually doing stuff on it. So there are people that only update it once a year. You do, in my opinion, want to show progress. But there's no set amount of time that you do it. It's just more of like as things get fixed. Because the thing they're pushing for now is having accessibility officers. I will say realistically, for a small size business, you're not going to be you're probably not going to find an accessibility officer, or it's not something that's really viable for you at that level. So having a web developer that has you on, say, like a website care plan, or having someone coming in and checking your website periodically. Not even, I mean, if you don't have someone checking for updates, that's a good reason to have them. But just having someone coming in and checking out. And that is more for if you're adding a lot of stuff to your site. If your site is literally sitting there and you haven't added anything to it in 8 months, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think you have to be as concerned.
Okay, no, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so it's all about use at the end of the day. Websites are a lot like cars. It's really all about how often are you using them, how much traffic are you driving to them. They break down a lot of the same way as a car does.
Is there anything else that we didn't discuss that maybe you want to talk about in regards to accessibility?
Trying to think if there's anything in particular. I will say there are a ton of great resources out there. As a business owner, I would go through, especially like WordPress is an amazing platform. A lot of people are using it. Go and look for WordPress talks on YouTube, any one of the accessibility talks. I'm going to tell you they're not 100% always up to date because some of them are a little bit older. Like there are some out there promoting the userway widget. That's how I started using that one. But the other content on there is good, and those are worth watching because as a business owner, at the end of the day, you are the one accountable for your website. So just understanding the very basics is fine. You don't need to be an expert at this stuff, but know that there are a ton of resources beyond that. And if you're talking to an agency or a web developer like myself, make sure you have that conversation with them and find out what they're doing to integrate accessibility into their processes. But do keep in mind that, how can I put this? I mean, I was going to say, because we're not exactly lawyers, right? But we do have to kind of be up to date on a lot of that stuff. And a lot of things are accessible right out of the box. So just understanding their process and making sure you're hitting those basic points as a business owner, at least you're aware of kind of what's going on.
So I guess it would be fair to say kind of like the first step would be to have that conversation with either the person that manages your website, or if you are managing your own website, kind of take that first step in looking at those resources to see where you need to start.
Yes, and actually now that I think about it, a good word to Google, it's shorthand for web developers. Accessibility is spelled A11Y. If you do that, you'll find things like the A11Y Project, and this is where I am getting deep and technical. That kind of thing will have tons of videos, tons of resources for checking colors, basic 11-step checklists, and those are what you're looking for, is those basic like 10 or 11-point checklists that are going to say,
do this, do that.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and anyone can figure it out. Like a business owner should be able to go on the back of a WordPress site. If they've never been back on one before, I will say take the half an hour to familiarize yourself with it. So you can just kind of see, you can kind of double check what's going on. So I know a lot of people want to just kind of trust everyone with what's going on, and that's totally fine if you're going down that route. But at the end of the day, like I said, you are responsible for understanding what level of compliance your business is upholding to.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jake. If our listeners today have any more questions about what we talked about, or if they're looking to find out more information about what we discussed, how can they reach out to you?
So if you go to my website, it's albion.digital. That's ALBION.digital, and you can find my phone number and email on there, or fill out a form. That's the fastest and easiest way to get hold of me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jake. We definitely appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, make sure to click that subscribe button so you never miss another show. Join other professionals looking to grow their business with Southwest Florida Inc. at SWFLinc.com and sign up for a free membership today. Thanks so much for listening to Business Builders. We'll see you next time.